Marta, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
You are so welcome. You know, as an American, I want to put an H after that R in your name, but it is Marta. Is that right?
That's right. I was born in Poland.
All right. We're going to get into all of that. And I am so excited to have you here today because when Dan Buettner, author of The Blue Zone, and Sean Anker, author of The Happiness Advantage, recommend your work, well, then I pay attention. So thank you for being on the show today.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
So here's what I'd like to do. We're going to get into how to grow young in a little bit. But first, I want to take you back to what we just started talking about, which is communist Poland. Would you set the scene for us and maybe explain what growing up there was like at that time in Poland's history?
You know, it's as I write in my first book, I kind of used the stories there a little bit. The book was called Meat Hooked, and it was about the history and science of human obsession with meat. And I cite some stories there from my childhood. For example, one that meat was very hard to get when I was growing up. And I used to stand for hours, and literally hours, like 3-4 hours at a time in lines to grocery stores with my mother to buy meat. And very often when you arrive at the checkout counter, there was nothing left. So that was definitely something that I remember very well, especially that for a small child, that was extremely boring. And generally lines were a very big part of our life, lines for everything, for food, for furniture, for shoes. And everybody had basically the same stuff. So, if you had certain 5 toys at home, all the kids you knew had the same 5 toys. And but in a way, it was nice growing up as well for children because there was not much jealousy or, just craving things you couldn't get. You got what you got, and then was it. And so we didn't watch much TV. There was only 15 minutes per day of children programming. And so we spent a lot of times outdoors. And for a child, it was pretty fun.
How many languages do you speak? I mean, obviously there's Polish, English, and French, right? But how many do you speak?
I mean, so this I would say is 3 and a little bit of Spanish, but it's almost nothing. So yeah. So
this is interesting to me because when you're speaking multiple languages, there are nuances. It's not just, hey, can I have a glass of water, in a restaurant? You're writing books in a non-native language. How did you get up to speed? Let's just choose English. How did you get up to speed to be able to write in English to the point where you can actually be an amazing author? Like, how did that happen? I mean, if you want to hear something funny, I cannot write books in Polish anymore. So why is that? Because you've been speaking English for so long? Yeah, and I've left Poland many years now. I've lived most of my adult life outside of Poland, and I cannot write that well in Polish anymore. I lost it, and mostly because I think I speak at home in English, and I read only in English, and I speak with my friends in English and or French. And yeah, you just lose those things. I kind of have a feeling that there is some kind of course, if I speak 2 or 3 languages, there is some kind of expansion in my vocabulary and stuff. But I still feel that when you're, a native speaker of several languages, you actually, something has to give a little bit. So at least for me, maybe there are some amazing people who can be absolutely 100% perfect in their own languages. But I noticed that when I started speaking English as my first language, then my Polish kind of suffered a little bit. Okay, as we move on into the concepts and points in your book, some of this is going to reveal itself in a moment, but I want to set the stage here. A lot of times people are afraid of change. We get stuck and, we're habitual in what we do. We stay in one career, we live in one location, and they're afraid of change. But you seem to have very little issue with change. You've changed where you live. You started in Poland. You moved to Canada. There were 6 countries on the way. So. And there were 6 countries along the way, and now you're in a village in France. Yes. So I want to talk about. I think people give a lot of thought to what they want to do with their life, perhaps, or maybe more thought. But they don't really give much thought to where they're going to do what they want to do. And you chose to live in a small village in France. What was it about France or a small village or making this lifestyle change that most appealed to you?
I mean, to be honest, the plan was to move to France only for 1 year for my husband's MBA. Well, 13 years later, we are still here.
13?
Yes, we've moved around a little bit. We were in Germany in the meantime for a while. We're in Singapore in the meantime for a while, in US, but in general, we've been 13 years in France. And I just love the lifestyle. It's the village where I am. It kind of hasn't really changed since 16th century. I've seen some old drawings of the village, and it looks basically the same. The community is just also amazing. I think this was also what inspired me a little bit to write Growing Young, because seeing this kind of community and how people are closely knit here and how it makes them happy and really makes life so much better. I really appreciate it, and it inspired me also to write about this kind of things like social connections and the power of community and the involvement in community and even kindness, everyday kindness I see here. These things were very inspiring.
Where in France are you? Are you in southern France? Are you which part of France?
No. I mean, we're close to on the border of Normandy, so kind of more of the kind of colder part. It's still, compared to Canada, it's the tropics, but it's for the French people, it's the frozen part.
It's the frozen part. And you've been there for 13 years. Did you speak French before you moved there?
Almost nothing. So even though I lived in Canada, I'm Canadian as well, but I spoke, as many Canadians from the English-speaking part, I barely spoke any French, like kind of the bonjour and une baguette s'il vous plaît kind of thing. So
and that's it. And now that you've been there, obviously you've been there for 13 years. Do most people speak English or French there? Because I know it's France and people speak, but like I just did 4 months in Florence, and every time in Italy, every time I opened my American mouth and I tried to say something in French, they just spoke back to me in English. And it was because they didn't want me to struggle, and they didn't want to struggle with my bad, Italian. So, it seems that the more I travel, the more people speak English. And were they doing that for you, where they were trying to help you, or is France just a whole different thing? And they're like, we're not going to speak English, and there's a reason for that.
I mean, the first time, because we also moved around a little bit from one small village to another small village, but before we were south of Paris on the border of Burgundy, very close to Chablis, which if you like wine, that can tell you something.
Sure, yeah.
So there, when my English was very poor, then indeed, a lot of people spoke English with me. When my friend was poor, they spoke English with me, and like dentists and doctors and so on. But now, because my French is pretty good. So even though I know people with whom I speak French, many of them speak very good English, but we speak French, obviously.
You speak French, and your children obviously are learning French because they're there, but so now they're speaking French and English.
I mean, my daughter is trilingual. I only have one child. She's
one child.
Yes, and she's trilingual, and she claims I don't speak French, but because I don't pronounce everything the correct way. But
that's so funny.
She's completely, her French and English are completely on the same level, and her Polish is a little bit behind, but she can still speak completely fluently.
All right, one more question on France. What is it about this misunderstanding that North Americans and French people have with each other, where we think and I'm going to put myself in this lump of people, we get there and we're like, why are they so mean to us? Why are they so rude to us? And the French, they have a lot of passion, and they just say what's on their minds, and they have no problem with that. What have you noticed about those cultural differences?
I mean, first of all, when I was moving here, I did have this kind of image that exactly French people are rude and they honk all the time when they drive. Probably I watched too many Louis de Funès movies before I moved here. But so I had this kind of image. And to be honest, I was surprised. It was completely untrue. And I've never experienced the so-called French rudeness in my 13 years here. And as of honking and crazy driving, I mean, in Paris, driving is special, but in terms of honking, like, it's the opposite. They never honk, at least where I live. It's just, somebody will stop to chat with their neighbor in the middle of the road, and they'll be standing there for 10 minutes chatting and laughing and ha ha ha. And there will be a traffic line of cars behind them, and everybody waits patiently without honking. And, I'm the one who's going crazy and wanting to honk, and they're completely fine. So, and, the same with rudeness. Actually, there is this joke in Paris, in France in general. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a menu from a cafe. And it says, coffee, €7. Coffee, please, €4. Good morning, bonjour, coffee, please, €2. Bonjour, coffee, please, monsieur, €1. And it's like, so basically for the French people, it's extremely important that you start politely. And basically, they're very much into being polite. So, for example, if you enter a French store without saying bonjour to everybody, you are so rude that everybody is already, against you, right? Because you've been really, really rude if you didn't say bonjour to everybody. So generally, I think that's the problem, that maybe Americans break this kind of rules. They are unaware of that. You have to always say bonjour. You have to always say merci. In the perfect world, is to say bonjour, merci, and monsieur or madame, or mademoiselle. And if you don't do that, that they feel kind of that you are really being very rude. So why should they be nice to you if you are so rude? So that's the way I think where the problem lies. But if you just try to just say the simple bonjour, things will suddenly be much nicer.
It's so interesting because they're massive cultural differences in the same way that, a French father or mother wouldn't tolerate disrespect from a child. They're not tolerating it either. If an American comes in, and in America, sadly, we don't have rules like that, say when you go into a store, you say hello. In fact, we're culturally conditioned to walk into a store, especially now with COVID and wearing masks, where nobody's even talking to each other. Nobody's looking at each other. And that is everything French. Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to talk about growing young. For most people, when they think of those two words, growing and young, and you put them together, it conjures up images of diet and exercise, or certainly in North America anyway. But your findings show that you can also get there in other ways. Can you expand on that and maybe even talk about why you wanted to do this?
I mean, so first of all, I never say that diet and exercise are not important, because they always are important, and eating healthy and exercising are important for your health and for your longevity. But what I am saying is that, first of all, there are many things that we obsessed far too much about that either don't matter at all for our health and longevity, or can even be detrimental. So, for example, things like some miracle foods or fad diets, supplements, exercise gadgets, some fancy new discovered exercise routines that you just must do because this is exactly the thing you should be doing right now. Organic foods, like some kind of miracle herbs, matcha, goji berries, and all this kind of stuff. We put too much effort in things like this, and they actually at best don't matter at all. The diet and then exercise I'm talking about that are actually healthy for you and important are actually very simple. So what I like to say is, just like Michael Pollan said, eat food, mostly plants, not too much. And that's basically it. It doesn't have to be some fancy organic heritage broccoli or kale even. It can just be your regular carrots and cabbage and apples. It's perfectly fine. So this is one thing. But also another thing that I discovered over years of my research was that there are things that matter even more than even that simple good diet and exercise. So there was one particularly revealing meta-analysis of studies I've read when I was writing Growing Young. And meta-analysis is when they put, this is kind of this golden standard of research. This is where scientists put a lot of studies together and look for overall emerging patterns, right? So the scientists doing this particular meta-analysis, they showed that whereas diet and exercise can lower your mortality risk anywhere between 20 and 30%, which is quite a lot. This is something really. Having very strong social connections, so having friends, a romantic partner, being involved in your community can lower your mortality risk by 65%. So, so there you had 20 to 30, and here you have 65%. this is even more than giving up smoking if you smoke 2 packets of cigarettes per day. So these are enormous effects. And of course, I'm never saying don't stop smoking. It's best to not smoke, eat healthy, and have strong social connections. And other things I describe in Growing Young have similarly large effects. For example, volunteering. It can lower your mortality rates by 44%, right? Having purpose in life is as important as would be eating the perfect, healthy Mediterranean diet. And these are things that we tend to completely overlook in our struggle to find the best fad diet of the day or the best supplements we should be swallowing and pills and downloading apps and for exercise and buying some kind of fitness gadgets.
You just hijacked my brain, and I just went on that ride with you because I'm flashing forward some of the knowledge that I've learned from Dan Buettner, who, as you know, is a big fan of your work. In fact, he's posting about your book on his Instagram feed. He loves it.
Okay, I haven't noticed. I have to check it.
You didn't know that?
No, I don't go that much to Instagram, so I'll have to go and check what he's writing.
Well, he's got a big picture. I can't believe you don't know this. He's got a big picture of you on his Instagram, holding your book, and he is. Here we go.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen that. Cool.
That is really, really cool. That's a great endorsement. And, he is always talking, as you know, about places like Icaria and Sardinia. And, there are some things that are quite contrary to what we believe as, I'm going to say, as Americans, or I'm sure a lot of industrialized nations feel this way, where we look at, smoking and drinking wine and, things like that. But you go on to some of these blue zones where they're living into their hundreds. And, the Italian man in Sardinia is having, wine at lunch, and he's having wine at dinner, and another guy's, smoking. But there is, it's just like, yeah, there you go. Like the French, right? And, they're certainly eating high fat, and they're smoking. But there are other things, which are all those things that you're talking about. Like you wrote in your book about, people with pessimism and mistrust are more likely to develop coronary heart disease. Well, we don't want to think about that. We want to think about the cigarettes doing it, or the butter doing it, or, the lack of exercise doing it. But you're saying, hey, look, people who are optimistic have an 11 to 15% longer lifespan than those counterparts. And I think that's fascinating, to put that together. So how are you doing that in your life? In other words, how are you approaching your life differently because of that? And do you think if you moved back to America or Canada, do you think that you would be able to approach these areas outside of diet and exercise? And I get you're not saying diet and exercise is not important. You're just saying don't disregard those other areas either. But do you think if you move back to an environment that doesn't really support the kind of situation where, somebody can be, stuck in the street and everybody patiently waiting while they're chit-chatting with the neighbor about, the latest tomato that they grew in their garden, do you feel like you'd be able to support that in another location?
I mean, I think it's possible to recreate this kind of life. Definitely, when I lived in Canada, I lived in Calgary, which is a very suburbanized city. And I did live in the outer suburbs. And I wouldn't do that again. So even though it was a beautiful place, and we backed our house back on the park where you could see wolves in the winter and lots of wildlife, and it was absolutely magnificently beautiful. But I wouldn't do it again because there was no community there. And if I were to move back, I would move to somewhere inner city, and where into one of those neighborhoods where you can walk around, right? Where you can walk to your corner store and meet your neighbors there, right? and there is some kind of small local park where people meet. And there are places like this in America as well, and especially now there is a lot of movement also for new urbanism, right? For placemaking, that's how it's called, for making, cities live, and having some kind of urban gardening projects, or throwing neighborhood parties. And people are starting to do that as well, and I'm pretty sure it's possible to do it. You just have to realize that it's not only for, I don't know, pleasure or some kind of making the place better, but it's also for your health. It's as important for your health to have this kind of community placemaking initiatives as is your diet and exercise. So I think if we kind of seen it from this perspective, maybe people would be more willing to do those things instead of going alone into the gym and posting on their little app how many kilometers they ran or how many push-ups they done. Instead they would maybe engage more in this kind of community things.
Yeah, COVID has caused us to reevaluate a lot of things in our life, and I have a friend that does Italian citizenship, and he can't take any more clients right now because so many people are applying for citizenship to move to Italy, and I'm sure that that's the case in France, and I'm sure so people are leaving because of unrest that's happening, particularly in our country. There's a lot of racial inequality that we're dealing with, etc. So do you think that we are, sort of in a bell curve now where we have become so dependent on technology, and we've become, just to put it bluntly, we've become ruder, we've become more isolated, we've become more separate, that these principles that you're talking about, like, building a strong support network of family and friends, and how that lowers mortality risk by, as much as 45%, where, exercise can lower it by 23%, right? There's a tremendous difference. Do you find that because of where we are today in the world, that there's even more of a need for us to figure out how to do this?
That's I'm certain of it. And in a way, I think that the current situation can act as a little bit of a tipping point, right? When we actually realize how much we need that contact in person. For how many people suddenly working online and only having those Zoom meetings all the time made them realize how actually much they appreciate the contact in person with their coworkers. How much they actually like the chats around the coffee machine or the water cooler, right? And maybe even the meetings. I heard people saying I miss meetings, when before people generally said they hate meetings. The same thing happened for my daughter's school. So, as kids do, she generally likes school, but she wasn't always very excited to go in the morning. But after the lockdown and after not going to school for, I think it was a month and a half, which wasn't very long compared to what children have in other countries, but still after that few weeks of not going to school, she and all her friends were so overexcited to be back. And I can still see the effects now, even though it's been a while they've been back. But she really started loving school. She loves the teacher. She loves sitting at the desk. She loves, going there. And something that I really see got much stronger than before. And I guess, I hope at least, that for many people, there can be similar effects on connection, right? It's feeling how being forced to isolate, maybe we'll appreciate even more how those things are actually important, because it's easy to forget when we're rushing in this kind of normal, pre-COVID times where we're just always busy with something. We might have missed the importance. And I just read a statistic today. It was done in Ireland, but I think it probably applies to other countries in the West as well. So the statistic found that in one survey that 57% of people said they are now really re-evaluating their lives like they didn't do before. So, this is kind of reassuring that people are taking more time to think how they want to live, how maybe they want to change their lives. And so it can be a time of reflection, I guess.
So I guess then the question is, how has writing this book changed your own life?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it definitely has. So first of all, making me realize, how important those things are, like, social connections, kindness, volunteering, community involvement, practicing optimism, conscientiousness, how important those things are for health. And I knew that those things are important before, but I didn't think they were important for health. I thought they were, just important because, it's better to be optimistic, right? Or, it's nice to be kind. But I never thought of them as actual health behaviors. And for example, in the past, I'm a runner, so I like running and I run for exercise. And I sometimes run half marathons. Didn't happen that many times, but it did. And I was planning to run another half marathon this year before the coronavirus struck. And then I actually realized that if I did prepare for this half marathon, it would take so much time away from my family that I wouldn't have really time to sit on the couch with my husband and chat after work. And in the past, I would think giving up on this half marathon and choosing to sit on the couch with my husband, it would make me feel guilty, right? Because I would feel that I'm somehow failing on my health, self-care, or about my health goals, sitting here on the couch and having a glass of wine. And but now I actually know that I shouldn't be guilty at all, or feeling guilty at all, because actually sitting on the couch with my husband is probably more important to my health than the extra miles I would have run, because I'm still running, just shorter distances, and maybe not every day, maybe 4 times a week, but I just have more time. And I have friends who have, for example, chosen to do things like Ironman. And there's nothing wrong with Ironman, of course, but I have a friend, for example, who stopped seeing his friends because he's doing Ironmans and he's so much engaged in it that he gave up on his friendships, and his friends are complaining. And obviously, this is not good for his health. So if he did a little bit less exercise and instead hang out more with his friends, he would be better off. And other things as well. For example, we talked about children, and my daughter has an issue with keeping her room clean. And I see it now as a health hazard, and not only because of the Legos that you can step on, but also because conscientiousness. So this kind of tendency to be on time for meetings, to keep your desk clean or your room clean, to pay bills on time, is actually one of the biggest predictors of health. To the point that one researcher I talked with, he actually said that if you could put conscientiousness in a pill, it would be the most powerful drug ever invented, like medication, kind of, now I see, that I should be teaching her to keep her room clean and generally be conscientious. And this is as important for her health as me cooking her healthy dinners and making sure that she's walking enough and having enough exercise. Whereas before, I didn't see it that way.
It's interesting. A lot of the things that you're talking about here, hearing as balance. One of the things that's interesting to me about the French is they drink wine, but they don't get drunk. They're not, you don't see them, necessarily doing shots on the bar, all night long. They're having an amazing glass of wine. They eat, and they eat high fat food, but not a lot of it. They have a bite here and a bite there.
And they always eat with other people.
And they always eat with other people. And they work, but not too much. They take time to make sure that they have the other areas of their life. So I guess the question is, how much do you think balance plays a role in life? Like I did, you're making me think of something. I ran 2 full marathons. And after the second marathon, I was like, screw this. I'm never doing this again. Like that was crazy. It was way too much. But I didn't realize the price that I paid of like training all day when I did the long runs, like being gone from my family, like all day on Saturday, because it was my long run practice day. So how much balance do you think factors into this?
I mean, I think it's all about balance. This is exactly what I was trying to say with the title. The title is Growing Young, and it's not about becoming. It's not the synonym for becoming younger. I meant growing as a person, right? So that's growing as a whole, as a person, and makes you also kind of become younger, or at least age slower. So this is kind of a play on words here. And so this is what I was trying to say, that all these things, when you think about it, being kind, right? Being optimistic, spending time with your friends, with your family, having a good romantic relationship, being conscientious. These are all things that we kind of all see as good things for how to be as a person, right? And which is kind of also quite satisfying when you think about it, that a person who would be very kind, optimistic, and friendly would be healthier than somebody who is mean and egoistical and a loner, antisocial. It kind of feels good as well. So I found at least those findings quite satisfying in a way, that striving to become better, to growing as a person, can also make our bodies healthier. It's pretty fascinating.
Tell me about the Rosetta Effect. What is that?
So this is exactly something that we already touched on before in a way, because so Rosetta is a town in Pennsylvania that got onto the radar of scientists in the 50s and 60s, 1950s and 1960s, because people were not having heart attacks in there, basically. People didn't have cardiovascular disease, and they generally lived much longer than in all surrounding areas, even though they had exactly the same water source, they worked in the same factories, they breathed the same air, shared the same hospital. And yet, compared to other towns, people were super healthy there. So Rosetta was settled by immigrants from Italy, from a town called Roseto in Italy. So of course, the first thought would be, the diet, right? But actually, bizarrely, for whatever reasons, the Italians who settled Roseto completely abandoned their diet and ate actually pretty badly. So they ate a lot of fat, sausages, lots of sugar, they drank a lot, they smoked. So their diet was really pretty bad. And so it was not the diet. So the next suspect were the genes, right? Maybe it was something that they inherited, their Italian genes made them live so long. But when scientists controlled for that, when they checked their genetics of the people there was also nothing there. There was nothing making them special and different than other communities or other people, like just nothing. So in the end, after years of research, what scientists discovered was that in Roseto, what made people so healthy, and especially in terms of cardiovascular health, was their community. So that was actually very special. They were extremely connected. They were constantly visiting each other. Everybody knew each other. There was just a very small town of 2,000 people. And they were constantly throwing parties where everybody was invited, hanging out in each other's backgrounds, hanging out in each other's kitchen all the time. They had lots of civic organizations. They volunteered. They made sure to keep their town pretty. They walked everywhere. So it was really, really communal. That's why the scientists call it the Rosetta Effect. So the effect of this kind of communal spirit of friendliness and living together and being connected has on our cardiovascular health. But also what the scientists did was back in the 60s, they predicted that if people in Roseto were to give up on their ways, their health would just go back to your American average. And unfortunately, this is exactly what has happened. So the next generation wanted to pursue, your American dream. So they moved to the suburbs, they built bigger houses, they bought bigger cars. Now they had to drive because they were in the suburbs. They were working longer hours to pay the mortgages. So they didn't have any more time to hang out with their neighbors. And the community spirit disappeared, the civic organizations disappeared, and the health of people in Roseto, unfortunately, right now is back to your American average. They are having as many heart attacks as everybody else, and it's kind of a sad story, but the Rosetta Effect.
So it was the first generation that was able to maintain the change, or was able to have the change, but their children didn't. Is that right?
I think there was more than one generation that kept the habits. I don't really remember when exactly the town was settled, but the last generation that still had this communal spirit was the generation that lived in the 50s and 60s. Already in the 70s, it reverted. It started going back to to the average, American average, and by the 90s, it was all gone.
Wow. I saw a documentary on that many, many years ago, and I forgot about it. And it's such a great reminder. So I love that.
Thank you so much, Rob, for having me over. Bye. Take care.